So if you're just happy just dropping a Strat into a combo with an overdrive pedal, then this section probably won't be of immediate interest to you. However, as I've learned that the longer I play guitar, the bigger your setup becomes, and it's kind of fun starting to put imaginative rigs together. In large tours, you'll typically see these larger rigs, and their purpose is to give you pretty much the most flexibility you have in terms of switching out either guitars or effects or amps on the fly. Let's look at the major categories of rigs. The first one would be fairly basic, and that is the effects loops that you will find in the back of most guitar heads, or some combos have this as well. Then a little bit more complicated one is a 4-wire rig. We'll look at that in a moment. Then we have our guitar amps effects switching box, with some sort of box in between your guitars and amps, allowing you to switch out to the amps and your various effects pedals. And then we have our wet-dry rigs. Let's start off with the effects loops. So here's what it looks like. There's basically a series version and a parallel version. So in the series version, we have our amp head. But instead of viewing this as one head, let's kind of break it in half, where we have our preamp and our power amp. And what we can do is send a signal from our preamp to the send, and then comes back into our power amp. So it goes out to the send and then returns back to the power amp. So then what we can do is we can take the send, take it through a bunch of our external pedals, and then return that back into the return, which ends up going back into the power amp. So in a parallel setup, it's virtually identical, except with the addition of a straight line that goes from the preamp to the power amp. So there's two paths, one straight through to the power amp, the other one that goes through that loop. And typically there'll be a volume knob or a send amount on that effects loop, so you can have varying amounts of whatever is in that effects loop. Now, in terms of effect board design, there's a few different ways we can do this. Typically a guitar, that'll just go straight through to your amp. If we were to daisy chain a bunch of effects, they would go in, maybe from the right here, we have maybe 3 different gain effects, and then followed by a couple of modulation pedals, and then followed by some time-based pedals. The guitar goes into the input of the first pedal, and then it goes output, input, daisy chained all the way through, and that'll work fine. That has worked well with everybody for years and years and years. But let me just throw a curveball in here. Imagine a metal core just burned up somehow, it just failed. Maybe the battery went flat, or the power supply was bad, or the pedal itself went bad. Guess what? That not only takes that out, that has destroyed everything downstream from that. And then, your guitar will not make it all the way through to your amp. Now, there is a different way of going about this, and that is using a true bypass. Now, I've got this true bypass looper from Keeley Designs, and here's what it looks like. We have a guitar which goes into the input and then straight through to the output. So everything works fine the way it is right now, guitar to amp. But if you were to activate that, then that would break that chain and then take it through in a loop through all your effect pedals, and then back through and then out to your amp. If I was to activate that again, then that would basically take that loop all the way out and then directly connect you to your amp. Now, why is this really useful? Well, imagine this. Instead of placing everything in just one big long chain, we could start thinking of them in groups: gain, modulation, and time groups. They're kind of like subgroups of pedals. And in this scenario, maybe we could have 3 of these true bypass loop boxes. And the first one, in other words, the one on the right, that's going out and through your gain subgroup and returning there. Now, instead of having all of these red squiggly lines all over the page, it's going to start to get a little bit busier. Let's change that out, and then let's change it with a more basic kind of design. So this diagram here is showing that the gain subgroup is going through the loop of the first bypass pedal, and the modulation is going through the second one, and time is going through the third one right here. Then when we place a guitar in, then the guitar would go in, it would go through the gains, and then out of that looper, into the second looper through all the modulations, and then out of that second looper into the third one through all of that, and then finally out to your amplifier. Now, why would you do it this way? Well, imagine in our example before where the metal zone just burned up. Do you remember that? We had the metal zone failing. Well, guess what? We could bypass that subgroup and they would all go away, and our guitar would be directly connected and go through to our second set, our modulation and time. So even though anything on our gain subgroup, if any of that failed, we can just bypass it completely. So there's a couple of reasons this is good. Obviously, the fail-safe option is really good, but also even if you bypass some pedals, they still kind of add some color to your sound. This way you can bypass them out of the loop, and also you can have very quick one-click access to just activate and deactivate subgroups, so you could bring your modulation in and out with just one click of the second looper in this example.